Hello and welcome. This is Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to take a look at the keys from the Golden Vault IP from Wizards of the Coast, the latest and greatest release. Despite the OGL and all the hubbub and problems, I went ahead and picked this up in support of Smiteworks and the Fantasy Grounds community. Even though a lot of people are still a little bit bitter about all the things that had gone down before, I still wanted to collect it and also get an idea of how they set it up and what it looks like in Fantasy Grounds. So without further ado, I'm going to just kind of take a little quick dive into it. Not going to get too deep into it. I don't want to do any spoilers, and I know many of you have probably gone on to trying other game systems and such. But I'm going to go ahead and do this anyway. So I'm going to grab something that's important to remember about Fantasy Grounds implementations when it comes to adapting content from pen and paper or PDF into the Fantasy Grounds platform. So there's usually a section, not always, but usually a section in there that talks about Fantasy Grounds and how to use it. So one of the things is that the complete book or adventure is presented in the reference manual. So there's no stories provided at this time. So what they've done is they've moved away from basically creating this twice, and they're simply now just going to be using it in the reference manual. I think at some point they're going to make this so that it's actually accessible from the main interface instead of having to go through the library and such. So we'll see what they do with that. But nonetheless, this is where your content is. They also made it so you can unlock it. So if you need to change anything or relink stuff, you can. It's not locked out to you. This is also very similar to what they did with the Dragonlance content. So if you are looking for story entries, that's the first one they tried this with, and it seems to be okay. I mean, the actual reference manual is a lot more useful in regards to how it looks, and also you have a search menu on the bottom. Then you can turn the pages at the bottom here. So it's actually a better thing overall. But a lot of us are still used to going over to the library and then going to the story entries. In this case, you won't find that here. So it will link to treasure parcels, tables, if needed. And the images will be embedded in the page so you can pop it out and that sort of thing. Battle maps. I wanted to show you something that's been going on recently, or more recently in Fantasy Grounds. So if you're going to use a map, especially the ones that come with official content, if you're the game master, you simply unlock it, and what you'll see here are different options that were applied to this map. So one of them brings out this lava color. So if you don't want that, you can actually turn it off or hide it, or you can make it only visible for the GM. Same thing for the layer when it comes to the labeling and the location. So if you don't want your players to see that, right now it's set to visible to GM only. You can turn it on so the players can see it, or you can turn it off altogether. So that's just another visibility layer that you have control of. And once you have that set, you can lock it so it doesn't get changed, and you'll be able to essentially have a way that you can turn on or off the labels if needed. So what that helps do is cuts down the number of images that you have to put into Fantasy Grounds. And all you're doing in this case is just using an overlay mask that has the locations in it. So that's a pretty cool thing that you can do with Fantasy Grounds. And then, of course, you have the layer that holds the map, the line of sight, the lighting, all that stuff. So this is just something that they're doing to kind of clean up the amount of work that's needed to go into the projects. And also it helps keep it all in one spot so you're not flipping through a player map and a DM map. Some people like that, but I think the way they're doing this now isn't too bad. So the next thing they mention is tokens. So every now and then it says there's artwork provided or supplied to an NPC in a module. So usually those are like the main characters or the main NPCs. So if you go into your campaign and you go to NPCs, then you actually go to keys from the Golden Vault. These are all of the majority of the NPCs that appear in the game. And if you open these up, some of these do have an actual art token, and some of them may not. So, like the cook here, he doesn't have a token, it's just a letter token. So a lot of people complain, like, how come there's no art? Why is there no tokens? Well, a lot of the times it's not even provided from the actual module. Or there isn't a token for a generic NPC, so that's why you would see a letter assigned to it. The other situation is that, for example, you might have a token that exists for an NPC as an alternate token, and they're allocated that to be a disguise so that you won't know exactly who they are, and it may not be the NPC or not what it appears to be. For example, an Oni NPC posing as an old man will have been given a letter token, probably the big letter O or big letter M, or a hag posing as a noble will have been given a noble token, so a capital letter N or like a generic noble looking thing. So that's something you want to keep in mind with Fantasy Grounds, is not everything has a token assigned to it. They can actually go out and create some out of thin air if they wanted to, but it really isn't in line with how the module was set up. And quite frankly, when you actually play around a table, unless you have a bunch of minis, you don't normally have a bunch of tokens and that sort of thing anyways, unless you make them yourself. So these are things that you can also assign yourself in the case of Fantasy Grounds. So, for instance, that cook, if you wanted him to actually have a token, if you open up his NPC record and you unlock it, you can actually switch out the token with whatever you want. So there's nothing stopping you from assigning your own. It's just that a lot of people have, in the past, have complained that there's no artwork or no tokens, when in fact it hasn't been provided with the original content. So generally they try to stay away from adding more content to the modules unless it really it helps with gameplay and such. And I'm kind of on the fence about that. I think that in some cases there should have been tokens, in other cases they probably didn't need to. So it really just depends on what your needs are and what the actual content is and what it's going to be used for in regards to play. So if you have a game that's more theater of the mind, you don't need a whole bunch of tokens generally. So it's just kind of a way they've done this. So those are the Fantasy Grounds things that were notated, and you'll find this going forward, that this is kind of the format that they're going for in the future. So over the last few months, you're starting to notice a little bit change in how they develop their products. This also helps cut down the queue time, and it helps if they get the product late from the publisher, because quite often the publisher will hand them something and it's got like 4 weeks before it comes out. So that really helps with that sort of thing. So you're not building stuff twice or doing things redundantly or inefficiently. So the next thing is just kind of going over the keys to the Golden Vault. If you haven't heard about it already, it's likely it didn't get a whole lot of advertising, but it is a collection of heists that you can insert into other games. You can run these as individual quests. You can string them together. Pretty much set them wherever you would like to in the Forgotten Realms or whatever your game's homebrew setting is. Basically, it gives you an outline of what the adventures are. It's 13 different adventures set for different levels. It gives you an idea of where and how to set up heists, like to plan, get a mission brief, you execute the heist, and then you conclude it. So those are kind of good for like one-shots or maybe a 3-shot, something that you would complete. Personally, I'd like a double taken ability, eventually cause its help with hidden NPCs. Double taken ability? Eventually cause its helps. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Oh, like a double token ability. Yeah, that's a functionality thing. So that would be more or less switching how Fantasy Grounds works. So that can be done with extensions, but I know what you're saying. Like to be able to switch it out on the fly a lot easier. Yeah, it just depends on what the programming or the back end of Fantasy Grounds is capable of doing. Obviously, it can be done, but I don't know if they would actually develop it unless they had to. So, all right. So the next thing is that there are 13 different adventures. I'm not going to go through them because I don't want to give these away. But they take place in a bunch of different areas. They're not all stuck to one spot, and you have levels 1 through 11. So that might be something that you would want to check and insert if you wanted to. And then also there's you're going to get, let's see, you get the parcels, the tables, maps, and those sort of things. So that's kind of helpful. It speeds up the process. But in all honesty, yeah, I get it. In all honesty, I think that this would just be really good for content if you ran out of things that you wanted to run in adventure. I think this would work well for that. You can also put together your own. As a matter of fact, if you have the SRD or the basic rule books, you can pretty much build anything you want in Fantasy Grounds within the confines of time. So you have to kind of get used to the different ways to input data and that sort of thing. But technically, you wouldn't even need all this stuff if you had some practice in Fantasy Grounds, and you can actually just use this as kind of like your guideline and then build your own heist. So you wouldn't necessarily have to have this adventure. This just makes it very convenient and easier if you want to run something on the fly and you don't have time to put into it. So that just depends on what your needs are and what you're doing, and also the type of table you're running. So that's just a preliminary kind of look into this. So you're getting 13 adventures. You have the Fantasy Grounds implementation, and then you have, your artwork, this reference manual, which is found if you open up the library and you go to modules. Over here on the left is where the module is. You click on that, you get all these different links here on the right, and if you click on reference manual, that's what this is. And like I said, you can search here on the bottom left corner. So there's a search field, and then you also have these next buttons. And when you're preparing for an adventure, let's say you were going to run this Merkmile Malevolence, you can actually take this link up here on the top underneath this reference manual, drag and drop it into the hotkeys, and then when you close this, when you come back to Fantasy Grounds, you can open that back up. There is the page that you had bookmarked, and then you can use these arrow keys on the bottom to get you through the content like you would a PDF or a book. So that's pretty handy. That's a kind of a common function in Fantasy Grounds. I'm sure other VTTs do something similar, but this is kind of the way that Smiteworks is moving in the direction of getting away from creating separate story entries in a more module view. So there is one story entry in here, and it essentially says this module does not contain any stories. The adventure is all contained within the reference manual. So that's just a little reminder that they moved that whole concept into the reference manual. So there was a little pushback from the community when Smiteworks first started doing this. I was a little bit adamant about it. I thought it was kind of cheap, but honestly, now that I think about it, and now that I've done some conversions myself, it is pretty redundant to have to build everything in the story entries and then move it over to the reference manual. So this makes it so you only have to build in one and not both. You're still going to have all your parcels and everything else. It just cuts down one of the data points. It also cuts down the amount of confusion. Like if you have links that break, it's easier to fix those than to have to fix them in both the story entries and the reference manual. So that's another thing that if you've ever done any conversions, you'll know what I'm talking about. So there's that. It has some pretty nice artwork. I'm not going to give away all of it because I don't really like doing that to people, especially if they don't run this for forever and then they decide they want to. But, there's all kinds of really good art. And another thing that Smiteworks is starting to do is they are taking out the background sometimes. In this case, no, because it's a full picture. But like when it comes to these types of pictures, instead of having all the background, they'll actually make this a PNG asset, in which you'll be able to use this more in other applications. It'll be more flexible, and you can kind of put together your own collage in Fantasy Grounds. So if you want to make use of having the content and building your own kind of, your own picture using the assets in Fantasy Grounds, you're more able to do that because you have these transparencies now, whereas before they would just give you the whole image, or it would just be a JPEG. And they did the JPEG thing to kind of cut down on the size of the module. But the way that Fantasy Grounds is set up now is it can handle a little bit more graphical information and memory. They still want to keep it to a minimum, but there is a scheme that they recommend. I don't remember what the compression level is, but essentially it's a PNG file that with transparency, and you can use this image in other images and layer them on top of each other and kind of make your own module or your own picture or your own scene depending on what you're doing. And if they ever get a chance to release their 2D interface where it's kind of more like theater of the mind, you'll be able to have more options with that. So going forward, they're actually taking the artwork and eliminating this background so that you can actually use the assets more and use them within Fantasy Grounds. And it's really not cheating anyone out or anything like that. It's actually giving you a little bit more flexibility and more ability to use the product. And since it's licensed to be used in Fantasy Grounds, there's nothing wrong with reutilizing these assets and reconstructing them into something else. You're not printing them, you're not publishing them, you're not doing anything against the licensing. So this makes it a very good option. I don't see that very often in many other products where you can actually take the artwork and use it to your advantage. There is a way that you can share the images with your players just as an individual item, but I think this would look really cool if you had like an abyssal background and you can layer this inside and make this so that it comes to life. So instead of just having a static image, you can actually insert a background into one of your scenes, put this character in there, and then add an effect. So let's go with the mist, for instance. So I'm going to add a mist layer, and what you can see here is how it kind of just goes over the top of this. So if you wanted to, you can put a mask on this, and then just kind of trace around by holding the Alt key, and that way you can decide where you want the actual mist to go. And then what you can do is turn it down and kind of give it a more of a, so you can kind of bring your pictures to life if you wanted to. And then you could do another cool thing like the tail. Maybe you want it to twitch. So what we're going to do there is add another effects layer. In this case, I'm going to use the water. That will make it kind of move. But right now you can see the whole entire image undulates, and that's not what I want. So I'm going to put a mask on it, and then I'm going to just trace around the tail, because that's all I really want to move is the tail. I don't want the entire picture to move. And then what I'll do is increase it. So you kind of have this, illusion that this tail is twitching. So you can do all kinds of things to kind of make this this thing come to life. So it's really up to you how you want to use the images, but it's a lot more flexible than just having an image and showing it to players. You can actually create your own collages and stuff with it. You can still just show them this photo, but if you want to actually make that more interesting, you could do some of the things that I've showed you here. So that's just a way to creatively use the assets, and you get more play value out of them instead of just having an image that you share and then you never see it again. So that's a good way to utilize your content that you have in Fantasy Grounds to the full advantage. And I think that's a good direction that they went for that. I always wondered why they didn't have the assets set up like that. And before, it was because they were trying to conserve on memory. I think they still have that in mind, but when it comes to creating content, you're still using, especially if you're going to use the Fantasy Grounds assets that you can buy, the art pack or the art subscription, that would really enhance the usability if you're so inclined to do so. Some people don't have the time to do it, but I think it adds to the game if you can spend that extra half an hour taking an image and kind of spicing it up a little. But it does have some pretty cool looking graphics. I'm not going to say that, I really like this clockwork here. This is from one of the adventures. It's pretty cool looking. And then as far as NPCs go, there's quite a few in this adventure. So if I break this out by letter, there's 6 pages of them in this book. So this thing is loaded with NPCs. So it's got monsters, It's got the non-playing character kind of the main characters in the game, or the main NPCs, quest givers, that sort of thing. And then of course you have your monsters. I don't know if there's a trap in here anywhere. I'd have to look, but you have security guards, yeah, that sort of thing. But what I was doing the other day with this content, so I could use this as kind of like a way to structure or get an idea of how the content's structured and kind of do my own thing. So in the player notes, I have a ton of different things that I was creating in ChatGPT. So I had a starting point, and this was a heist where the players have to go into Neverwinter, and they will try to either steal or protect the Eye of the Sun. So I was going to make this more of a heist that has a reversed use. So instead of just doing a heist, you can also do a security detail. So it kind of makes it more interesting, and you can have a higher replay value. So instead of just being the one who steals the content, you can also be the one that helps protect it. So there's two ways to play it without having to create a bunch of new assets, which is really nice because you can use the same map. You would just change the direction or the way that people use the content. So for instance, in this intro, I said, in the bustling city of Neverwinter, rumors have been spreading about a heist that is about to take place. It is said that the notorious thieves guild, the Shadowblades, has set their sights on a high-valued treasure held in the city's museum. The object in question is a powerful magical artifact known as the Eye of the Sun, which is said to have the ability to grant its user immense power. The authorities of Neverwinter are aware of the Shadowblades' intentions and have hired a group of adventurers to stop them. The fate of the city rests in the hands of these adventurers, who must use all their skills and cunning to prevent the thieves from stealing the Eye of the Sun. So this is a completely separate heist. What I could do is, instead of using these names and places here, I could also use the ones that come out of the keys from the Golden Vault, or I can use the locations or maybe the maps for the museum, whatever it is that you need to pull out of here. So it's up to you to mix and match your homebrew with any content, or you can make them completely separate. It just depends on how they address your needs in far as gameplay goes. So what I have some lore here about this story. So if I was going to build something else, I would go ahead and, so this says the Shadowblades are a notorious thieves guild that operates in the city of Neverwinter. They are known for their daring heists and their ability to stay one step ahead of the law. The guild is led by a master thief named Balthran, who is rumored to be a skilled magician as well. The Eye of the Sun is a powerful magical artifact that was recovered from an ancient ruin by the city's museum. The artifact is said to have the ability to grant its users immense power, but also has a dangerous curse that affects anyone who tries to wield its powers. So then I made a table with some starting points. There's some dialogue and narration. I mean, you can really get into this and kind of make your own thing. So I had a guardian golem, some magical traps, and museum guards for this particular thing, for this heist. And then I made like a 5-room dungeon type thing. And then there's all kinds of stuff in here, like there's NPCs. I mean, there's a ton of stuff I have to go through. I took a bunch of text from ChatGPT and just pasted it over here. And as I create the content, I'm going to erase the notes behind me and then build my own story entries and build it that way. And then later on, if I want to, I can convert it into a reference manual with artwork and everything else. So I've made some really neat artwork to go with this. I've got some major NPCs. I've done all that stuff, and I could tie it into keys from the Golden Vault just by saying that the adventurers are approached by the Golden Vault, which is like a kind of like a guild, and that they were going to be in competition with another group that's going to try to pull off the heist. And then I also put in that you can help the authorities protect the heist from the thieves. So you can become like an elite guard or some kind of special agent that's going to help alleviate or mitigate the problem of the heist taking place. So it makes it more interesting, and you can work on both sides of the law. You can really make this more interesting and less one-sided, in other words. So that's what I've done. So I'm going to work on those, I think, into some future events, maybe I'll use this golden vault as a backdrop, but actually just make my own content, because that's really the ultimate goal, I think, for a lot of game masters. But you have to be willing to put in some time, and that's something that most people don't have. So it's nice to have an adventure, kind of like the keys from the Golden Vault, to build and set into the actual locations that you're already working in, whether it's homebrew or not. The other thing is, just kind of coming up with your own custom things is a lot more rewarding, but it is time consuming. So there is that. Also, I like to create the art and kind of have my own idea, and it kind of makes it easier for me to run if I make my own stuff. I don't necessarily want to read through the entire adventure just so I can run it. I just kind of want to pull things out of it that I need, and maybe also end up running some of it if need be. But nonetheless, this is just a kind of a quick preview of the content you're getting. So you're getting 11 adventures, getting a whole bunch of NPCs. Looks like there's a little bit of armor described in here. Let's see if they got weapons. Yeah, so it's got quite a bit of stuff. You can almost run this on its own. I think if you just had the SRD and you already had characters made, you can run this pretty easily. But if you want to build characters and stuff, you'll probably have to get all the other books. But nonetheless, it looks like a lot of fun. Again, I didn't really buy this to support Wizards of the Coast, even though it does. I did this to support Fantasy Grounds and the Smiteworks and the community. So that's the main reason I got the content here. And I still like the product. I still like the adventure. I still like the game. I just don't care for the publisher at this time. So anyways, this is just a quick look through the D&D keys from the vault, the Golden Vault. We talked a little bit about Fantasy Grounds implementation. We showed a little bit of the content, and then we talked about maybe adding your own heists and your own adventures in or on top or around what's already there. So this really just kind of depends on what you need. But nonetheless, that's pretty much all I have for today. I didn't want to make this too long. I think we've been going for about 20 minutes. Hopefully you guys will find it in your hearts to pick this up, even if it supports the Wizards of the Coast that everyone's kind of mad at right now. But I looked at it as supporting Smiteworks more than anything else. So anyways, folks, take care. You have a wonderful evening. Have a good week. I'll